The record should reflect that the jury has joined us again. Welcome back, everyone. Ms. Pearson, you may proceed with your direct examination of Brett Mills. And sir, I remind you that you're still under oath, okay? Thank you.
Agent Mills, we were talking about holes and impacts in the theater prior to the time that we broke for lunch. And in your process of marking all of the holes and impacts that you found within Theater 9, how many holes and impacts did you find that were related to bullets?
They were actually related to bullets, 235.
And did that include what we've seen as shotgun patterns on the walls?
Yes, ma'am, walls and seats.
Now, in the walls and seats, and we've previously seen pictures from another witness that showed a large number of marks on walls and a large number of marks on seats. When you had a whole number of shotgun pellet impacts, did you consider that to be one hole or impact or more than one?
On some of them, we just took the entire pattern as just one hole, and other ones we actually, because we couldn't tell if they were a smaller caliber pistol or rifle at the time, and we were actually labeling those also as holes.
Did you do the same thing in Theater 8? Go in and figure out how many holes and impacts were in Theater 8?
Yes, ma'am, we did.
Do you recall how many you found in Theater 8?
I believe it was 16.
Now, you indicated that the first part of the process was marking where all of the holes or impacts were. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes, ma'am.
Once you had all of the holes and impacts marked in Theater 9, what did you do next?
They were surveyed in by total station. The theater itself would have been, the scanning process would have started. Then a photographer who came from the laboratory with us started actually photographing for our exams the individual holes, impacts, the evidence itself.
Did you place rods into the seats at some point?
That would be one of the final procedures that we do. The problem when you run a rod is that once you insert it, you've actually changed the hole itself. So we always try and do all of our measurements, all the photography, everything before we ever run the first rod.
So now explain how you use rods.
The rods, we use two types. They're actually color coordinated. Pink is for 0.22 inches in diameter, yellow are 0.35 inches in diameter. Depending on the size of the hole, we will start with what's called a probe rod. We will, depending on if we can see through it, you can actually look through holes and actually line them up. And sometimes, depending if there's material within, in this case there were actually foam seats, you couldn't see from one hole to another. So you would take the probe rod, follow the path of the bullet as it traveled through, in this argument for us, let's say, a seat, and then it would exit out the back and it would have to go to another one. Now, depending on if, say, the bullet broke apart or it picked up more material and created more holes into the next set of seats, we were trying to find which one actually showed a true trajectory. And that's usually the heavier mass of the bullet that carries on until it actually stops.
In this particular case, were you made aware of the different firearms that were used in the theater?
Later on during the exam, yes, ma'am.
So you knew that there had been a rifle, a shotgun, and a .40 caliber handgun that had been used?
That is correct, yes, ma'am.
Was that information something that was necessary or important for you to have in order to try to determine which were holes, which were impacts, and how to do your bullet trajectory?
No, ma'am. Normally, sometimes we do not ever have the luxury of knowing the weapons that are present. We're there just to try and plot the holes and then plot the trajectories of those themselves. It's nice to know sometimes the calibers that are used, but it's not necessary.
Was it helpful, though, to have that information?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Asked and answered.
Overruled. This was a different question than the one that was asked.
And I'll repeat it. Was it helpful for you to have that information?
Yes, ma'am, it was.
So when you start to place the rods, can you place a rod in every impact or every hole that you find in a seat or in the walls of the theater?
No, ma'am.
Why not?
Well, depending on the size of the holes, depending on how large it creates, as a bullet travels and it starts hitting intervening objects, it actually starts deforming, and as it keeps traveling, it might, depending on the type of material, it might blow out. We call it, or refer to it as blowout. The hole is so large you can't even use a rod. You can stick a rod in there, but it's not going to provide you a trajectory. Other times, say with an impact into concrete, we know it's where a bullet's impacted itself, but there's no way to actually put a rod in there to basically get an angle off of the rod itself. Nothing will hold it. So normally we need multiple holes or at least a material that we can stick a rod into and it maintains its directionality.
Does that mean that you can have more holes and impacts in a theater than you will be able to build trajectories from?
Oh, yes, ma'am, most definitely.
And as a result, when you've finished creating trajectories, will you have a trajectory for every bullet that's been fired in the theater, for instance?
No, ma'am, not at all.
How did you determine that some of the holes or impacts that you were seeing were not going to be ones that you could put a rod into?
Depending on the type of material, there was, the seat consisted of fabric, and then it was foam, and then there was a laminate veneered wood that was the back. The bottom portion of the seats themselves it was a molded steel pressed, then there were springs, and then there was actually foam, and then the fabric on top of that. When some of the projectiles were traveling through, they might have penetrated the bottom of the seat if the seat was up, would have hit the spring, ricocheted off into somewhere. There was no exit. So I could put a rod in, but the question is that depending on this big hollow seat bottom, I could rotate the rod every which way. I'm not going to be able to give an accurate reading or trajectory off of that. So that would be one I would have to disregard.
Do you need to have both an entry and an exit in order to successfully plot a trajectory?
Depending on the material, yes, ma'am. If it is wood is very good for scenarios with drywall. Houses are very good. If you shoot into a stud, you can actually feed in a rod into that stud and it will hold it perfect if it goes deep enough.
Now, with regard to, we've seen pictures of a number of little flags in the theater.
Yes, ma'am.
So do those show any kind of a trajectory?
I had to use those. They were trajectories of the pellets out of a shotgun shell. The pellets are extremely small, so for any of my rods it wouldn't work. We were actually using engineering flags that would actually insert into the fabric, into the foam, and depending on how deep it penetrated the wood, we could actually insert it. But the pellets never actually exited out the back of the wood panel, so there was no through and through. So that's why we were actually using flags so that you could see the directionality of the pattern.
Once you had the rods in place, were photographs taken to show what they looked like in the theater?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness and hand him what have been marked as People's Exhibits 3622, 3601, 3640, 3643, 3645, 3649, 3702, 3632, 3736, 3734, 3749, 3748, and 3741.
Yes, you may.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recognize all of those photographs?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Do they fairly and accurately represent your work in the theater in July of 2012?
Yes, ma'am, they do represent my work.
Your Honor, I'd move for the admittance of the photographs I've tendered to the witness.
Ms. Spengler, do you have any objection to those exhibits being admitted?
No.
Without objection, P-TR-3622, 3601, 3640, 3643, 3645, 3649, 3702, 3632, 3736, 3734, 3749, 3748, and 3741 are admitted and may be published.
Could I have 3622 first, please? What are we looking at in this photograph?
This is the photograph taken from the front of Theater 9, going back toward the projection room. The flags that you see, the rods that you see, and the little white rectangles are the labels of the bullet holes and impacts.
Could I have 3601, please? And in this photograph, do we see predominantly flags as opposed to rods at this point?
That is correct, yes, ma'am.
And what do the flags represent?
The flags were the shotgun patterns that are visible in 4 of the seats and along the right-hand wall that you see up there.
Could I have 3640, please? Now, is this the first row of the stadium seating?
Actually, it's row 8. Yes, ma'am.
First row of the stadium seating. And what are we seeing in this photograph?
This is a side view of the seats with trajectory rods, lasers, and the engineering flag showing a shotgun pattern.
Could you point out a laser to us? The mouse actually works on this screen in front of you, I believe. And
It's a little,
it's a little sensitive.
all right.
There.
This that you see right here is a red laser. The other one that you see over here is a green laser. Different line amplification.
So we're looking at something that's been attached to a white piece you're pointing to that's been attached to the end of pink rods and...
Yes, ma'am. They're threaded so that you can screw them onto the tip of a rod itself.
Now, you've indicated one is red and one is green. What is the difference in those two colors in terms of what they do?
A green laser, because of the different light amplification, can travel farther and give a stronger beam. For my purposes, there's really no difference. They don't denote anything different.
Why did you use both colors?
I used every laser that I had in order to basically plot and do my job.
Could I have 3643, please? Now, is this the next row up, row 9?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
3645? And is this row 10?
Yes, ma'am.
And are we seeing both flags that represent shotgun, and I don't know, am I calling it impacts or holes, to use the right terminology?
Well, there were actually holes. They just, they ended in an impact on the back of the seat, but they are holes in there, into the cushions.
And additionally, there are other rods in that row?
Yes, ma'am.
Could I have 3649? Is this the next row, row
Row
11?
11, yes, ma'am.
3702? What are we looking at in this photograph?
This is from the right-hand side of the theater. I believe we're probably up around, I would say, row between 15 and 18. In the background, you can see, if I can get this to move, this is shotgun pattern into the left-hand wall of the theater. Here's a better view of a green laser Again, we also have flags representing a shotgun pattern itself, ma'am.
3632. Where are we in terms of within the theater, looking at this photograph?
This is the hallway on, if you're facing the movie screen, this would be the left-hand side of, it's a ramp walking into the theater itself, and these are trajectories as they come through.
And is this the wall on the right-hand side of this photograph that adjoins Theater 8?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
And in the foreground of that picture, I see a green, is that a green laser attached to a rod?
Yes, ma'am. There's 3 green lasers, actually 4 in the picture itself.
3736. And if you could explain what we're looking at in this photograph in the lower on the seat.
In this, you have, your photo's washed out. This would be an entrance hole through the front.
And this is row 8, seat 18. The next one will show you that. But
In row 8, seat 18. There, but you see the rod actually coming out the bottom, and then you see how the yellow rod looks a little ridiculous because it's pointing up. Something caused the bullet to actually change direction and go in a downward angle where it impacted on the metal base of the seat itself. You also have 2 lasers denoting trajectories in the back portion of the seat.
and when you say something, what can cause that rod to, or the bullet to turn and go back into the seat?
An object that could have been sitting there, it could be basically a bullet ricocheting. It could be bone, it could be a wallet, it could be keys in someone's pocket, but it can change the direction of the bullet itself in flight.
Could I have 3734, please? Is this a close-up view of that same seat?
Yes, ma'am.
3749? What are we looking at in this photograph?
This is in Theater 8, if you're facing the screen, this is the entrance ramp on the right-hand side. The left wall is what is butting up against Theater 9, and the rods are showing trajectories exiting out of that wall and traveling into the theater.
So all of these trajectories are coming from Theater 9 through the wall into Theater 8?
That is correct, ma'am.
3748?
Is a close-up view of what we just described in the last photograph. In this one, you can actually see where the drywall dust was blown out and actually wound up impacting into the carpeted wall on this side over here and along the surface of the handrail.
3741?
This is a reverse angle in Theater 8 of the right ramp entranceway looking toward the screen. Just gives a different perspective of the trajectories.
Thank you. Now, once you had put all of the rods into the theaters, did you also, and you had lasers on them, did you then attempt to light or illuminate the trajectories?
Yes, ma'am. We used the lasers themselves. The problem with rods over great distances, even though they are pretty lightweight individually, once you start connecting them, if you try to do a distance over, say, 10, 15 feet, you'll actually get a bow. It doesn't give a true representation of a trajectory. Strings will work good for about 30, maybe 50 feet. We used those in Fort Hood. It was a smaller area. When you're looking at an area that's roughly 200 feet, you would like to use a laser because a laser will actually shoot in a straight line. So as with all the lasers that I had, I attached them to rods to give a visual perspective of what the trajectories would look like.
I'm going to hand you what have been marked as People's Exhibits 4848, 4849, and 4850.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recognize those photographs?
Yes, ma'am.
Do they fairly and accurately depict your observations in the theater in July of 2012?
Yes, ma'am, they do.
Your Honor, I'd move for the admittance of People's Exhibits 4848, 4849, and 4850.
Ms. Spengler, do you have any objection to the admission of these exhibits?
No, Your Honor.
All right, without objection, P-TR-4848, 4849, and 4850 are admitted and may be published.
Could I have 4848, please? What are we looking at in this photograph?
This is a representation, it's not of every trajectory, but spread throughout the theater showing the directionality from a shooter's position looking out into the theater. So as you see all of the lasers coming back to the lower left-hand corner approximately, that would be the area that the shooter would have been standing in.
Now, it looks like several of these trajectories go towards the ceiling. Can you explain that, please?
On a couple of them, for example, this one right here where you see it going up, it's actually an optical illusion from the camera angle. If you go back and look at one of the photographs, I believe it's People's Exhibit 3640, you can actually see the two lasers that are sticking out of the back of the seat, and they're not pointing upward, they're actually pointing downward.
And could I have 3640 back up so that we can look at that?
That would be this red one that you're seeing right here, that in the picture looks like it's pointing in an upward direction. We were trying when we were taking the photographs to get them to come back down. The photographer, which I am not, tried to describe how the refraction through the lens works, but we couldn't get all of them to actually come back down again.
So despite the fact that in that photograph we see what appeared to be trajectories going toward the ceiling, did you find any trajectories within the theater that indicated shots went to the ceiling?
No, ma'am.
Could I have 4849, please? What are we looking at from this photograph?
This is a different perspective showing the, again, Theater 9 from the lower left-hand corner, but now the camera has moved a little bit more to the right so you can actually see the trajectories traveling up and into the wall between Theater 8 and Theater 9.
And similarly in this one we again see these trajectories that appear to be going towards the ceiling.
I didn't have any trajectories going that high, ma'am.
Okay. And 4850. What are we looking at in this photograph?
This is a photograph that is taken from the wall dividing Theater 8 and Theater 9 over toward the exit side, but you can see the trajectories coming in a downward angle to the lower left-hand portion, which is the front of the theater, right side.
Now, did you have to, and you can take that one down, thank you. Did you have to place the lasers more than one time in order to ultimately shoot all of the trajectories in the theater?
Yes, ma'am. I didn't have enough to do every single rod.
So none of those photographs depict all of the different trajectories within the theater?
Not at one time, no, ma'am.
And again, we saw red and green lasers within those.
Yes, ma'am.
Did it mean anything different that some were red and some were green?
No, ma'am.
You indicated that you were aware of the kinds of firearms which were used in the theater. As a result of having that information and looking at the holes and impacts and the trajectories that you were able to determine existed in the theater, could you tell which kinds of firearms caused which holes and impacts?
For the majority of them, yes, ma'am.
What is it about that, the holes and impacts and knowing the kinds of firearms, what were you able to determine from that information?
Would counsel please approach? Ms. Pearson, ask your next question, please.
Were you able to create trajectories from all of the holes and impacts in the theater?
Not for all of them, no, ma'am.
From the ones that you were able to create in the theater, were they based upon the measurements and data that was collected by you and the total station and the lasers operators that were working within the theater?
That and the placement of the rods themselves, yes, ma'am.
How did you verify the information that was collected by the total station or by the lasers as being accurate and accurately depicting what you were observing in the theater?
From the measurements, well, after reviewing to make sure that every hole was represented on the graphics that was generated, any of the hand measurements that I personally conducted, I could go back and basically put a protractor on to see if the angles matched up with my measurements. As for the holes through the seats and the trajectories going through them, with the placement of holes and the trajectories of themselves and then comparing them to photographs, it's an accurate representation of what we have visually and on the charts.
Were color diagrams produced from the results of the shooting incident reconstruction?
Yes, ma'am, they were.
And did you verify the information that was contained? Did you verify the diagrams that were produced that they were accurate?
Yes, ma'am, because they were a part of my report, so I had to verify that everything was correct before it could be sent out.
And who were they produced by?
Bill McPherson.
Did he pass away recently?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, I'm going to hand the witness what have been marked as People's Exhibits 47, 43 to 48, 25 inclusive.
Okay.
No objection to the admission.
All right, you're moving their admission, Ms. Pearson?
Yes, Your Honor, I am.
All right, without objection, P-TR-4743 through 4825 inclusive are admitted and may be published.
Before we publish those, from the observations you made in the theater, from the data that you collected and reviewed, and from all of the results in this case, were you able to determine to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that the shots were all fired from a particular convergence point?
Not with I wouldn't say they were convergence because it was such a large area. There was movement, but yes, ma'am, from the right front corner of the theater is where the shots actually, except for maybe one leading back toward the screen, the majority of the shots were on the right-hand side of the theater, the majority of them being by the exit.
When you were looking at all of the holes and impacts in the theater that had been marked, after you had marked them, run the rods, done the lasers, was the theater essentially deconstructed at that point?
After we had plotted out the trajectories themselves, the hole, going from hole to impact, once everything was done with the shooting incident reconstruction, then the evidence gathering started, and that's when the seats would be removed and basically pellets recovered, metal fragments recovered, any evidence that was left in the seats themselves.
As a part of that, did you determine that any of the holes or impacts that had previously been marked with a number, in fact, did not prove to be either a hole or an impact caused by a bullet?
Yes, ma'am, we did.
Which ones were those?
May I refer to my notes, Your Honor?
Would that refresh your memory?
Yes, sir.
All right, you can look at your notes, and then once you've done that, you can put the report down, face down, okay?
All right, sir.
Thank you.
It was hole 1, hole 2, hole 28, and hole 200. They were determined not to be bullet holes. And then hole 196 was not used due to duplication of numbers.
And the remainder of the holes that we've previously seen marked as holes 9-1 to 9-240 were in fact holes or impacts that were caused by bullets?
No, hole 1, hole 2, that was the original holes that
Right.
were listed.
Right, but the remainder, with the exception of those, the
remainder, yes,
remainder
ma'am.
of the holes of 9-1 to 9-240 were in fact caused by bullets.
Yes, ma'am.
Could I first have People's Exhibit 4743 up? It'll be up here in a moment. What are we looking at in this diagram?
This is Theater 9, and these were all of the trajectories, a representation of all the trajectories that were obtained from the measurements in Theater 9 and where the origination took place.
And I see different colors in this.
Yes, ma'am. Because there were so many shots that actually carried over to different rows, I asked Mr. McPherson if he could do all of the trajectories on one diagram first, but color code them so we know which ones went to each row. Then he broke that down, and each row is represented with just those colors going to that one row.
Now, the colors that go to a particular row, will that color then travel to the next row if in fact the bullet travels through the seats in one row and moves to the next row?
Yes, ma'am. It's where the hole or the trajectory actually originates within that hole dictated the color.
Now, when we look at all of these trajectories, do all of these trajectories represent all of the shots that were fired in the theater?
It doesn't represent the shotgun patterns. If you noticed on the left-hand side of the theater, there's nothing to mark here, and then the little gray that you see in the seat back here, that represents a shotgun pattern, even though you couldn't pick up anything or measure anything for the rods, but the photographs do show the origin going back over into the general direction of the right front of the theater.
And we will have other diagrams that show that, won't we?
Yes, ma'am, you shall.
Now, if a person is shot in the theater and the bullet remains in their body, would you be able to create any kind of a trajectory with knowing that?
No, ma'am. The FBI's policy is we're not basically pathologists or medical examiners. We do not do the bodies themselves. Your medical examiners can provide a trajectory within the body itself. On another note, if a bullet traveled, went through multiple seat fronts and backs, but then lodged within somebody, it might not give me, or I would not be able to say that the bullet or trajectory ended here, because if they were taken out of the theater by the time I arrived, I have no idea or no knowledge of what happened.
So you would have a trajectory that might end at a seat or at a seat back or on the floor, but in fact...
Or just in space, yes, ma'am.
Or in space, but actually, in reality, went further. We just don't know that.
Yes, ma'am.
Could I have 4744, please? What do we see in this photograph?
This is Theater 8, and these are the trajectories coming in from Theater 9. This is the dividing wall. It's actually a double wall that has been constructed between the theaters, but these are the trajectories that we plotted coming from Theater 9 into Theater 8.
Does one go all the way across Theater 8?
Yes, ma'am. It was a skip off of the handrail up on the left-hand side and wound up impacting into the wall clear across the theater.
4745, please. And what do we see in this photograph, or in this diagram?
This is the shots of traveling from Theater 9 going into Theater 8. If you note the orange color to the lines that represent that, but you can see there where they actually penetrate the wall and then carry on, and the diagram you just saw previously was a continuation of those trajectories.
Now, does this show where the shots start from?
No, ma'am. A trajectory, all this tells you is that somewhere along this path is the bullet. The bullet traveled along this path. Somewhere along this path is where it originated from. Unless I can get a strong convergence like you would see at the base back here, with at least four or five trajectories coming in and crisscrossing one another, I could say these four shots originated back down into this area right here. We just stopped at that one area because we can't tell you if the person went forward or they went back. But where you have a convergence, that would be an origination point that I could feel very confident about.
When you create a trajectory, are you working backwards from the hole or the impact back to the direction where the shooter would have been?
Once I do run the rods, whether I'm running string, rods, or lasers themselves, yes, ma'am, I'm going from basically the first hole backwards.
Could I have 4746, please? What do we see in this photograph?
Again, we're back in Theater 8. These are the trajectories that are exiting out of the wall and traveling into Theater 8 itself.
4747.
This is an individual trajectory traveling from Theater 9, going through the wall and traveling on into Theater 8. The hole 228 is the hole that is in Theater 9 and then exits out, hits number 5, fragments into two pieces, where you see it hitting number 11.
So if we've previously seen photographs of 9-228, in Theater 9, and 8-5 and 8-11, are those photographs the ones that are depicted by the numbers that are on this diagram?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
Could I have 4748, please? And if we could also isolate or zoom into that area over on the right side where the boxes with numbers are. Okay. And if you could tell us there what we're seeing.
So this is a better view. You can actually see hole 228, where the bullet penetrates the wall in Theater 9, exits out of Theater 8's wall at hole number 5, but it fragmented into two pieces, with one traveling on and ending at 16, and the other one ending at 11.
4749, please.
.4749 is the trajectory from Theater 9 going into Theater 8. The trajectory would plot out as hole 194 to hole number 3 to hole number 12.
So if 194 is in Theater 9 and 3 and 12 are in Theater 8?
Yes, ma'am.
4750?
Actually, I stand corrected on that. This is the skip. Number 12 is a impact on the handrail of the right-hand side of the theater. It skipped across the surface, traveled all the way across the theater, and it made a hole in the curtain on the left side of the theater and impacted into the wall.
Thank you. And is this one 4750 that's up currently?
Yes, ma'am,
Okay.
4750.
Could I have 4751, please? What do we see in this diagram?
This is trajectory coming again from Theater 9 into Theater 8. It would be hole 239 and exiting out in Theater 8 at hole 6.
4752?
Same trajectory, you're just looking at it from the Theater 8 perspective.
So we've gone from Theater 9, it's traveled through, and now we're seeing it in Theater 8.
Yes, ma'am.
4753?
4753, again, trajectory starting in Theater 9.
And if I could also then have it, we could isolate the boxes on the left.
So there's I wouldn't call it a railing because it's so high up, but basically it's a trim piece that covers up the carpet and then where your curtain starts. So it penetrated that piece of wood at 189, exited, and then penetrated the actual wall of 190, exited out on Theater 8 side at hole number 8, and carried on to hole number 10.
4754, please.
4750 is the same trajectory, it's just the perspective that you would see in Theater 8.
I think you said 4750. Did you mean 4754? Sir?
Yes, sir, 4754.
Could I have 4755, please?
Again, this is another trajectory from Theater 9.
And if I could isolate the boxes.
Enters into the wall at hole 197, exits out at, it actually splits into two from number 7 and 14.
4756?
This is a perspective from Theater 8.
4757? And again, if we could isolate those.
4757, hole 195 on Theater 9 side, and exiting out into Theater 8 at hole 4.
4758?
4758 is the same trajectory, and it is from the perspective of Theater 8.
4759.
4759, trajectory beginning in theater 9, penetrates the wall at hole 232, and then exits into theater 8 at hole 2.
4760. And if I could isolate the boxes that are on the right.
4760 is the perspective from theater 8 of the trajectory as it carries on from theater 9.
4761. And if I could isolate the boxes.
This is a trajectory again beginning in theater 9, penetrating the wall at hole number 193, exiting into theater 8 at hole 1.
4762. And if you could isolate the boxes that are on the right. And when we see the line stop in theater 8, because this is the trajectory from theater 9 to 8, what does that mean? Does the bullet stop, or?
No, the trajectory stopped. It had no secondary point to actually carry it, or tertiary point to carry it on even further. I don't know if anybody actually recovered a bullet. I don't know what happened to it. So basically, yes, it exited out the wall, but that is as far as I could take it.
4763. And if I could also have the boxes.
This is a trajectory within theater 9. It penetrates the half wall of the stairs at hole 180, exits it out the half wall on the backside at hole 185, and punches a hole at 191 but does not exit out. I don't even know if we actually recovered that.
4764. And if I could zoom in on the area where the boxes are. What do we see in this?
This is a trajectory originating in theater 9. Again, penetrates the half wall at hole 181, exit at 186. Penetrates the full wall between theater 8 and 9 at hole 192. And then if you notice where hole 9 is, the bullet actually changes direction from those 2 points in theater 8.
What would cause the bullet to change direction?
Probably an intervening object between the walls. I know that the walls, instead of having wood studs, they were actually metal studs, and there was electrical conduit running through.
4765. And this is theater 8.
Yes, ma'am, it's theater 8.
And if I could have the box.
So you can see where the bullet, as it exits out through hole 9 into theater 8, it then travels and hits the half wall of the right side stairwell and makes hole 15.
And again, for you, the trajectory ends at that point?
Yes, ma'am.
4766. And if I could have the boxes isolated. Is this theater 9?
This is theater 9. You have a trajectory going through the half wall beginning at hole 182, exiting at hole 184, penetrating the wall between theater 9 and at hole 233.
Does this reflect then, because the red line ends at the wall, that it does not go through into theater 8?
That is correct, yes, ma'am.
4767. And if I could have the box. What do we see in this?
This is a trajectory originating in the right corner of theater 9, penetrates the half wall at 179, exits at 183, and breaks apart into 3 different fragments, which then hit at 187, 188, and 227.
4768. And down on the left corner, there's a box 230. Is this Theater 9?
Yes, ma'am. That is the left wall where a shot shell pattern was denoted on the left-hand side of the theater.
Is this where we saw a number of little orange flags in the wall?
That is correct, yes, ma'am.
And this is at about row 16, between middle of row 15 to the middle to about row 17?
Yes, ma'am.
4769. What are we looking at in this diagram?
These are the trajectories for row 8, or at least originating for row 8, and then the trajectories going back to the approximate area of where it was started.
These appear to be a green color?
Yes, ma'am.
So what we see is they go to row 8, but some of them go beyond row 8. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. Once they penetrated either the seat or the seat back, they could have carried on to the next row.
4770. And if we could zoom in on the boxes. What does this illustrate?
This is a trajectory. There was a metal rail in front of row 8. There was a hole where number 3 is. Did not exit out of the piping. That was the type of railing it was. It just created a huge impact on the backside.
4771. Again, if we could isolate the boxes and include a row number if we can.
This is a shot pattern. Hole number 5 is through the cup holder and a cup that was present still in the cup holder. And then 6 is the pellets coming back through, lining up with that shot.
And is that row 8?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
4772. If I could have that plus a row number. What are we seeing here?
Your Honor, may I refer to my notes to describe what the holes are going through?
Any objection? All right, go ahead.
This is row 8, seat 13. This is a trajectory through the bottom of the seat, exiting the side of the seat cushion and impacting on the seat frame of the row.
4773. And if we could isolate that with the row number.
This is in row 8. First one would be, I believe, they're both in seat 14, and the trajectory would be hole 10, which is the front of the seat back, and to hole 11, which would be the top of the seat back. The trajectory for H12 to H13 is the front of the seat back, exiting out the rear of the seat back.
When the trajectory, you end it there at 13.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that the end of the trajectory, or how do you know that for you that's the end of the trajectory?
Well, I stopped it there because I couldn't find a secondary hole on the seat behind it, so it had to have struck an object that was no longer there.
4774. And if we could isolate those.
This is still row 8. We're in seat 15. Hole 14, which is the side of the seat cushion, to hole 15, which is the top of the seat cushion. Goes to hole 16, which is the front of the seat back, to H17, which is the rear portion of the seat back, and then impacting at 204, which is the flooring that creates basically a shelf.
And the fact that we have a 204 here with 14 through 17, was this part of a secondary search, again, looking for impacts or holes that you'd missed?
Yes, ma'am. It was actually found once we started running the rods themselves.
4775?
Again, we're in row 8. This is seat 17. So trajectory beginning with hole 18, which is the front of the seat back, exiting the rear of the seat back at hole 19. It then continues to row 9, seat 17, enters the bottom of the seat at hole 36. It fragments somewhere in the seat cushion and becomes H37, which is the top of the seat cushion, to hole 38, which is the front of the seat back, to hole 39, rear of the seat back, to impact 40, which is the concrete riser below the back of the seat of row 9.
4776? Now, we see several trajectory lines in this one coming from the right corner of the theater.
Yes, ma'am.
And why are they all included in this one diagram?
This is all from one basically originating in one seat, row 8, seat 18.
Okay, and if you could explain what we're seeing.
We'll start with the lowest number first. Hole 20 is in the front of the seat back, exits out at the rear of the seat back, continues on to row 9, seat 18, goes through the bottom of the seat, fragments through the seat cushion and the seat back. I had one trajectory exit at hole 53, which would be the rear of the seat back, and impacts at impact 207, which again is the concrete riser, which creates your footpath behind row 9. And then the other fragment exited out at hole 54, rear of seat back, but I don't know where it went after that.
And so all of these boxes with numbers here represent holes or impacts related to how many bullets?
At least 4 trajectories, ma'am, 4 bullets.
4777?
This is still row 8. We're in seat 19. One trajectory going through hole 31, front of the seat cushion, exiting the top of the seat cushion, entering the front of the seat back, and exiting the rear of the seat back.
So again, the bullet exited that seat, but you couldn't track it any further.
No, ma'am.
4778?
This is 7 trajectories.
And this is going to row 9?
That is correct, ma'am.
And now we're in kind of an orange color?
Yes, ma'am.
4779?
This one's going to start row 9, seat 11. We have a trajectory beginning at the right side of the seat back at hole 208, and then exiting out the rear of the seat back at 209.
And even though it exited, you could not determine where it next went?
No, ma'am.
Whether it hit a person or something else?
No, ma'am.
4780?
4780 is row 9, seat 13. Enters the front of the seat cushion, exits at the top of the seat cushion at hole 34, carries on to hole 35, which is the front of the seat back, but it does not exit the seat back itself.
4781?
4781 is row 9, seat 17. Trajectory begins at the cup holder between the seat 17 and 18, then hits H44, which is the armrest between the seats, of 17 and 18, exits the top of the armrest, then hits H41 of the seat back of seat 17, and then exits at H42 rear of the seat.
And you can't trace it beyond age 42.
No, ma'am.
4782,
4782, we're at row 9, seat 18. It enters the front of the seat back, exits the rear of the seat back, continues on to row 10, seat 18, enters the front of the seat back at hole 81, and exits out hole 82, which is the rear of the seat back.
4783,
This is just an individual trajectory, no secondary holes or impacts, but I could get a trajectory rod in, and it enters the front of the seat back, but does not exit. And this is row 9, seat 19.
4784,
This is seat 20 of row 9. It enters the front of the seat back at hole 57 and exits out the seat back at hole 58.
and you can't determine where it went after that point.
No, ma'am, I cannot.
4785,
4785 is a depiction of just the trajectories themselves going into row 10.
and again, this looks to be kind of an orange color too.
Yes, ma'am.
4786,
4786 is a shotgun pattern.
if I could have that pattern, please.
It is part of row 10, and it's between seat 8 and seat 9, where we had holes in the cup holder, the armrest. Then we had pellets that had traveled into the bottom of the seat. We had an H61 denotes multiple perforations of the seat back, but does not exit. We found more between the bottom of the seat and the armrest between the seats, but all of them represent just a shotgun pattern.
And these are what we would see in the photographs with the small orange flags.
The engineering flags, yes, ma'am, that's correct.
4787,
You have two trajectories going into seat 14 of row 10.
and does this reflect then two different bullets hitting this same area?
It would be two bullets. In fact, one of the bullets actually split, and actually you can see where it fragmented and carried on into two. It would have looked like it would be two more bullets, but it's actually just one bullet breaking apart.
Can you tell us how it impacted this seat?
On this one is H63, front of the seat back, exits out the seat back at hole 65, continues to row 11, seat 14, begins at hole 100, which is the bottom of the seat. It then fragments into trajectory hole 101, which is the top of the seat cushion, to hole 103, which is the front of the seat back, to hole 109, which is the rear of the seat back, and then trajectory hole 102 is the top of the seat cushion to hole 104, front of the seat back, to H108, rear of the seat back. So what happened is it just fragmented within the cushion and created two separate paths.
And how would it fragment?
Depending on the type of bullet, the design of the bullet, and the intervening objects that it hit, it could break for rifles, certain ones are designed to fracture right at the cannelure. So it would...
At this point, move to strike.
What's the objection?
Relevance and exceeding the scope of the witness's opinion related to his expertise.
Sustained.
4788. And if we could isolate these boxes. What are we seeing in this one?
This one is row 10, seat 15. It is a trajectory in the front of the seat back, exiting out the rear of the seat back at hole 68.
4789,
4789, you have two trajectories represented here. This would be row 10, seat 16. Hole 70. Hole 70 enters the front of the seat back, exit the rear seat back. Hole 69 is front of the seat back, exiting out at hole 72, rear of seat back.
4790,
4790, we're at 4790, we're at row 10, seat 17. There's two trajectories, but there was a lot of fragmenting and carrying on.
so can you explain the path of the fragments?
Starting with the first trajectory, beginning with hole 73, which is the bottom of the raised armrest between seats 17 and 18, carries on to 874, which is the side of the raised armrest, to 875, enters the right side of the seat back, exits out the rear of the seat back at hole 79. Then it fragments and continues to row 11, seat 17, beginning with hole 117 and 118 and 119, which is the bottom of the seat. Hole 118 will continue on to hole 120, which is the top of the seat cushion, which then carries on to hole 121, front of the seat back, to H122, exiting the rear of the seat back.
4791,
4791, we are now in row 11.
and these appear to be sort of an olive color or brown. I can't really tell them the light.
Yes, ma'am. I'll go with that.
4792,
4792,
if I could isolate that box.
this is a shotgun pattern between row 11, seat 6 and seat 7.
Do all of these represent different pellets or a group of pellets?
Some of them are actually trajectories generated by some of the pellets. So, for example, hole 83, 84, 85, 205, they were in the front of the seat back, but they don't exit. But then you had a trajectory of 206 to 210 to 211, which was the front and side of seat 6, and then traveling on to the side of seat 7. Then hole 86, 87, 88, and 193 are in the cup holder and the armrest between seats 7 and 8.
4793,
This is a trajectory beginning with hole 89, which is the front of the seat back, exits out the rear of the seat back, and then hits the front of the metal seat frame and the impacts on 92 at the bottom of the seat.
4794,
This is row 11, seat 9, hole 94, front of seat back, hole 95, rear seat back.
4795,
4795, this one, again, front of seat back, rear seat back, does not carry on past that. This is in row 11, seat 12.
4796,
4796,
and if I could have those. Thank you.
this is two trajectories. The first one is hole 105 and 107, front of seat back, rear of seat back. The second trajectory is hole 234 to 106, and then hole 235, which is the front and side of the seat back, which is part of the shot pattern from row 11, seat 15.
4797, And if you could isolate 110.
This is a shotgun pattern found in row 11, seat 15.
4798.
This is row 11, seat 16. The first trajectory is hole 111 to hole 113, front of seat back, exiting out the rear of seat back. The next trajectory begins at front of seat back, exits rear seat back at 112 and 114, continues on to row 12, seat 16, from the bottom of the seat, which is hole 137, carries on to trajectory H138, which is the top of the seat cushion, to hole 141, front of seat back, exits the rear seat back at 142, and then to a next trajectory of 139, top of the seat cushion, to hole 140, front of seat back, to hole 143, rear seat back, and impacts on the concrete riser behind row 12, and that would be impact 223.
4799. If I could isolate those.
We're at row 11, seat 17. You have a trajectory of front seat back, rear seat back, 115 to 116. Continues on to row 12, seat 16. Enters the bottom of the seat at hole 136, but does not exit.
4800.
We're now moving to row 12. These red or burgundy trajectories.
4801.
4801.
If I could isolate those.
This is row 12, seat 5. One trajectory. Hold on. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, seat 4. It is a trajectory beginning at hole 123, exiting the back of the seat at 124, continues on to row 13, seat 3, penetrates the bottom of the seat at 144, exits through the top of the seat cushion at 145, enters the front of the seat back, exits the rear seat back, and impacts on the concrete riser at impact point 231 behind row 13.
4802.
4802, one trajectory through row 12, seat 5. It enters the front and exits the seat back.
4803.
This is row 12, seat 8. This one enters the front of the seat cushion, exits out of the top of the seat cushion.
4804.
4804 is row 12, seat 10. It enters the front of the seat back but does not exit.
4805.
4805 is 3 trajectories in row 12, seat 14. You want me to go through all 3 of them?
Yes, please.
All right. It begins with the front of the seat cushion at hole 129, exits out of the top of the seat cushion, carries on to the front of the seat back, exit the rear of the seat back at hole 135. The second trajectory begins at the front of the seat cushion at hole 130, exits the top of the seat cushion, carries on to the front of the seat back, and then does not exit out the back of the rear. The third trajectory begins in front of the seat back, exits out of the seat back at 128. It continues on to row 13, seat 13. It hits the metal frame of the armrest at hole 236 between seats 13 and 14.
4806, please. Now, what do we see in this one?
These are the trajectories, I believe, now for row 13, seat 4. No, I'm sorry.
for
Yes, we're in row 13 now.
row 13? This is showing all of the trajectories?
Yes, ma'am.
And besides the two that come from the corner in the right, do we see one coming from a different part of the theater?
Yes, ma'am, up in the front. Almost dead center.
4807. And if we could have the box isolated, this in the lower left.
Trajectory, this is 229. It enters the front of the seat back but does not exit itself.
Now, could you determine where that came from?
All I could say is that it originated from the front of the theater.
Because it hit the front of the seat.
It hit the front of the seat, and it would be possible to hit it from any other direction.
4808. If I could isolate those.
This is row 13, seat number 4. Entrance and exit, front of seat back, exits the rear of the seat back.
And again, even though a bullet exited the seat back, you can't track the trajectory beyond that point.
No, ma'am, I cannot.
4809.
Row 13, seat number 9.
We could have that one.
This is one trajectory, beginning at the front of the seat back, exits out the rear of the seat backs, continues on to row 14, seat 8, enters the bottom of the seat at 154, exits out of the top of the seat cushion at 155, and then penetrates the front of the seat back and exits out of the rear seat back at hole 157.
4810. If I could isolate that.
This is in row 13, seat number 12. It is a shotgun pattern in the front of the seat back, but does not exit.
4811.
This is row 13, seat 15. Trajectory enters the side of the seat cushion at 226, does not exit. Oh, actually, that one's not denoted. Yeah, it is. And the origin is from the front of the theater on that one. And then I-225 is the armrest between seats 15 and 16. Again, the origin is just from the front of the theater.
4812. Now, is this the trajectory that comes from sort of the center, front of the theater?
Yes, ma'am, it does.
If I could isolate the boxes.
All right, this one enters the front of the seat back at hole 150. It doesn't exit. It makes a hole in the rear of the seat back, but does not actually penetrate and exit out of the laminate on the back side.
4813. What are we looking at overall in this particular diagram?
We've moved on to row number 14.
4814. If I could have the boxes. What do we see in this photo?
This is row 15, seat number 7. You have a trajectory beginning at number 152, exiting at 153, continuing on to row 15, seat 6. It enters the bottom of the seat, exits out of the top of the seat cushion, enters the front of the seat back, and exits out of the rear of the seat back.
4815. Could I have these boxes?
This is row 14, seat 11. You have two trajectories. Oh, I apologize. You have a trajectory, but you also have a shotgun pattern. Hole 237 represents the shotgun pattern in the back of the seat back, but it does not exit. And you also had a trajectory from a bullet, which begins with hole 158, enters the front of the seat back, exits out the top edge of the seat back, continues on to row 15, seat 10, hits the cup holder between seats 10 and 11 at impact 168.
4816.
4816. This is row 14, seat 14. Begins at hole 160, exits out of the rear of the seat back at 161, continues to row 15, seat 14, and impacts on the bottom of the seat at impact 169.
4817.
Row 14, seat 16, enters the front of the seat back, exit rear seat back at 163, continues on to row 15, seat 16, enters the front of the seat back at hole 170 and exits at hole 171.
4818. What do we see in this?
This is an individual trajectory all the way up at row 18.
4819.
4819 is the trajectory. It begins at hole 176, which is the front of the seat back, exit out of the rear of the seat back at 177. It then continues to row 19, seat 9, enters the bottom of the seat at 152, exits out.
You mean 172?
I'm sorry, at hole 172, exits out of the top of the seat cushion, continues into the front of the seat back at 174, exits out of the rear of the seat back at 175.
4820.
4820 are two trajectories that were shot into the back wall of the theater.
So they're a little hard to see. If we could zoom into the left corner, see the color, they're yellow, looks like.
Yes, ma'am.
And those hit the back wall of the theater?
Yes, ma'am.
4821.
4821 is basically a lone hole, number 238. The angle measurements put it back into the right front corner of the theater itself.
4822.
Again, one individual hole, number 240, and the trajectory was measured back all the way to the right front corner of the theater.
4823. And is this a box at the back wall on the bottom there?
This is an impact 178. No secondary point that I could actually create a trajectory, but it would have originated from the front of the theater itself.
And you would know it originated from the front of the theater because it hit the only place it could come from is the front to hit the front of this
Yes, ma'am.
back of the theater. But it did not, why were you unable to create a trajectory for it?
It didn't actually exit out the back side of the trim piece that lined the theater.
So you'd be unable to put a rod in to determine an angle.
That is correct.
4824. And if we can zoom in over on the hallway on the right side of the photograph, all the way to the front of the theater. So what are we seeing in this photograph?
This is the only trajectory we had traveling toward the movie screen itself. Origin would have been somewhere along this pathway. The bullet traveled up through a curtain, the movie screen had been removed. We did find a bullet hole and actually impacted on the insulation on the back wall of the movie theater.
So now the red line comes all the way back to about where row 11 is. Does that mean that that trajectory started at that point?
It would have started within that area, yes, ma'am.
And 4825. And that's up at the top, at the front of the theater? We have
Yes,
2
ma'am.
points?
198 is the, basically a side curtain, and then 199 is the impact point on the back wall and the insulation of the theater itself.
And this would be where the screen would be in the theater?
No, actually, the screen would be where you see this pink line right here. There's just a huge amount of dead space behind it.
Okay.
So we had to crawl up underneath there, and then we went back in here and found the impact and the actual bullet itself.
Okay, thank you. And were those all of the trajectories that you were able to plot in the theater?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to turn the lights back on.
Besides using the data that was collected in the theater and from your observations and from the total station and the lasers to create diagrams, is that same data also used to create models?
Yes, ma'am. The data that we gather, we can take it back to the laboratory, and we can make a physical model of anything.
I'd ask you to step down and look at the model we have in here, which I believe is marked as demonstrative exhibit 1097.
Before you do that, we need to take a break, Ms. Pearson. So, members of the jury, let's go ahead and take our afternoon break. Please remember that my advisements continue to apply during the break, okay? Thank you. The record should reflect that the jury has now exited the courtroom. Everyone may be seated, and sir, you may go on break if you wish. All right, thank you. Right, how are we doing on schedule? In terms of your presentation of evidence, we'll be at the end of 4 weeks tomorrow. I'm just trying to figure out where we are schedule-wise. Are we on schedule still? The last time I checked a couple of weeks ago, I think you said we were ahead of schedule, so I'm checking.
I think we're on schedule to end when we originally thought we would.
Okay, that's all the time you get. Remember that, I'm going to hold you to that. So, use the time however you wish. Anything else at this time that we need to address on behalf of the people? Anything on behalf of the people?
Sorry, Your Honor, no.
Anything on behalf of the defense?
No.
Thank you. See you after the break. The court will be in recess.